Yeah. Right. And it's 1:50, so we'll start. And so, yeah, first of all, just to say welcome to everybody and thank you if you have joined us. And yes, you've already had the notice about recording that that the session will be recorded. And what we're going to do is to hear our 4 very short summary presentations. So it's 2 minutes summary of the paper, which was available already on the website, and then 2 minutes to reflect on a question that the presenter has suggested might be good for discussion. And so we'll do that, and then we'll open the session for sort of questions, answers, whatever. And maybe if you can raise your hand, might be the easiest way if you want to talk. If you put something in the chat, Shadi has said he will check the chat. But I think that's probably it, and we should go and hope everybody keeps connectivity. And I'll maybe put my video off. I think for some people overseas, I don't know if Plangsat might have problems coming from northern Nigeria. A few people from overseas may have difficulties. So if you want to keep your video off and just put it on when you want to talk, that's fine. So Nita, do you want to go ahead now first, please?
Oh, okay, thanks. I was not expecting that, but I'll quickly share my slides if I can see them here. I can't. Sorry, I'm unable to find my slides, but can I? Okay, I just.
Yes.
So yeah, you can see that, right? So I'll quickly share. So I am Dr. Nita Mishra. I am currently with Dublin City University as a postdoc researcher on gender and health. When I prepared for this presentation for the conference, I was with University College Cork as a researcher on this project on social inclusion of rural to urban migrants. My co-authors, Dr. Wu Tian Tu and Dr. Edward Lahif, have joined the session, I think, and we were just in the other session talking about another aspect of the same project. So this paper is basically on domestic workers. We call it "We Make a Better Life: Tracing Agency Among Migrant Domestic Workers in Hanoi," and we were looking at how studies in the Asian region or mostly on domestic workers normally focuses on low pay, informal status, poor working conditions, basically undervaluation of domestic work. In our study, which was between 2019 and 2021, we discussed women's perspectives on their choice of work, on working conditions, on relationship with their family, on social relations in urban Hanoi, and their hopes for the future. And using arguments from feminist discourses, we first illustrate that domestic work is often a positive choice for women, which again then raises questions around our understanding of agency and empowerment. For example, we all know domestic work is very broadly the performance of household chores. I won't go into details because of time. And the literature, like I pointed out, has mostly focused on everyday tales of mistreatment, humiliation, mounting social anxiety, and escalating health issues, compounded by local patriarchal norms, depending which country you're talking about or which context, and caste hierarchies. There are some good examples of change in the way it's studied. A cohort of well-educated English women who left office work to become domestic workers in Euro-American expat households shows that there's an emergence of a new managerial role for domestic workers. Our argument has been basically around Lutz Beneria's argument in 2003, that it is important to understand that women work in the informal sector. Now, domestic work is part of the informal sector for varying reasons, not all of which may have been investigated, and that scholars should focus on aspects of women's paid work, which increases their autonomy, bargaining power, choices, and the ability to defend the interest of family and community. And that's what this whole study is about in Vietnam, in urban Hanoi. Because Vietnam's labor codes of 2019 do give a legal definition of domestic work, and they do have some rights in the constitution currently, which is quite new. And yet social prejudice against domestic work remains widespread, in spite of written contracts, social insurance, and all that being enforced by the law, which is only coming to play in recent times because there was a break due to COVID also. So one of the things we concluded was, in the paper, domestic work is often portrayed as unskilled and an extension of traditional domestic work, but it is apparent in this study, often with the support of their employers, women are eager to improve their skills and learn new ones in areas such as cooking or become good chefs, domestic management, childcare, and care of the sick and elderly. So the question that was posed by, which I discussed with Gina, was how do domestic workers negotiate justice-oriented partnerships in this case? I think I may have gone over by 2 minutes, so we can do this in the discussion, and we can bring this out in the discussion which follows everybody's presentations. Is that good?
That's fine. Thank you very much, Nita. So we'll go on now with the 3 presentations. These are actually all from the same GCRF funded project on women's mobility, access to transport, and so on. And Emma's going to start by talking about work that was conducted in Tunis.
Thank you, Gina. I'm not going to talk so much about the research project itself, which was a GCRF funded project called Youth Engagement and Skills Acquisition within Africa's transport sector, promoting a gender agenda towards transition into meaningful work. Rather, I want to talk about one particular aspect of the research method that we used to gather data, which was the employment and deployment of peer researchers. So we employed 6 young women in Tunis and similarly in the other capital cities, the other cities we were looking at. And these 6 young women were trained, they were recruited through local youth centres, and they were trained in the content and substance of the project, but also in methods of interviewing and the ethical aspects of the project as well. And then they spent a period of time both keeping their own mobility diaries for us, but also interviewing other women as they traveled around the city, as they were mobile around the city. So that could be walking on trains, on buses, in taxis, in the queue at the doctor's surgery, wherever. They would do short interviews, which they didn't record, but they wrote up as field notes, which were then translated through a dialogue with local researchers that we also employed. So I told you in the video a bit more about that. My concerns with it, on the one hand, I wanted to say that it was an incredibly valuable source of data. It was very, very rich, very thick data, which, to be honest, I don't think someone like myself would ever have got if I had been going around Tunis in taxis trying to talk to women. One of the other, I see it as a positive, is that our peer researchers were filtering the data. Inevitably, they would prioritize, they would hear things that resonated with their own experiences more than they might hear things that didn't. They would shape the way they presented the data back to us. And although one could see that as problematic, actually having a constant dialogue with the peer researchers about that filtering process was really valuable for teaching us what mattered and teaching us how we should, what we could learn from them about how we could understand the data and understand the material coming from the interviews. And this is where I would refer to the question which Gina and I have talked about, which is, on the one hand, this is a fabulous way of getting really good, rich, thick, authentic local data. But there is also the question about how we avoid the trap where we then use these peer researchers and we use their labor, and yet there is a power inequality between us as researchers sitting in the West and them as young unemployed women doing this data collection for us for a wage, but at a local wage. And if we are genuine genuinely concerned about decolonizing our own research, we have to be aware of those power inequalities, and we have to find active strategies to try and redress them, and to afford proper value to these researchers doing the work for us and to the product that they come out with. So we asked, how do we do this? What are practical ways that we as researchers can do this? I think one of the things that I've been thinking about this, I don't have the full set of answers, but the things that come out to me are, first of all, being very clear with the peer researchers about what they want out of this process. Is it just a wage, or are they looking in our case, they were very, very keen that the training components that we introduced to help them to participate in the project should translate into actual tangible qualifications or certificates that they could use in their own job searches afterwards. We also made sure that when we had country consultative groups, they were put front of stage and their voices were front of stage and not our own when we engaged with local transport stakeholders, whether that was ministry representatives or union representatives or whatever. So we were trying very actively to privilege their voices rather than our own in these engagements. I don't think that's enough. We reached the issue about publication. It is important, and we've been working through this with the peer researchers, that when they want it, their names appear on any publications which have drawn on that research process, regardless of whether they wrote a word or not of the publication. That can be complex when they want to remain anonymous in some, or to maintain control over who knows about their participation, which is an issue we also have to be able to engage with them. But in fact, all 6 of our peer researchers have said they would like to have their names on any publications coming from that. But there are also issues about, which I don't think as a project we've addressed completely yet, about how we ensure that publication doesn't just take place in European, American, Western journals for privileged audiences, but that dissemination takes place within local avenues for dialogue and dissemination as well, where again, we would foreground the peer researchers rather than ourselves. We haven't yet fully addressed either how the connection between acknowledging the filtering that comes through relying on the analysis and reflection of the peer researchers also translates into adjusting our own theoretical frames and methodologies, which are drawn from imperial scholarship. So there are deeper issues there that we still have to address. And the big one that really struck me was about unequal distribution of risk. So traveling, this is my last point, Gina, so I'm nearly finished. Traveling around the city in public transport, particularly certain modes of transport in certain areas, was considered by our university as too risky an activity for us to do. And yet our peer researchers were doing that. And so the project was allowing an uneven distribution of risk. And I don't think we have yet worked through how that kind of issue can be managed with peer research. So those are some of the issues that came out of it for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emma. So that sets quite a bit of the context of the couple of the papers that are following too. So Plangsat's going to go on now and talk about the situation, the sort of the work that she was doing in Abuja with Fatima Adamo, who unfortunately is unable to join us, but again about partnership and all the complexities of partnership. So do you want to go on now, Plangsat? Thanks.
Okay, I'm trying to share my screen. Okay. Can I go on before I do that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. I'll try to just go on from where Emma stopped to talk about how young women peer researchers and academics, including NGOs, worked together to improve women's safe transport in Abuja generally. We had 2 study sites within Abuja, and the entire aim is to try to see how everyday mobility challenges faced by young women in these communities work. We engaged the Abuja Urban Mass Transport Company, which is in charge of the bus travels within Abuja. That's from the employment side. We engage also the Ministry of Transportation. And then in terms of CSOs and other organizations that work to control the transport sector in Abuja, we engage the National NURTW, that's Nigerian Union of Road Transport Workers. I must say that this research was a very welcomed idea because there are just very few or none to say researchers that have employed this kind of approach within the country to the best of my knowledge. We were able to not only just work as academics, but we worked with the peer researchers, just as you saw in the case of Emma in South Africa. We worked with peer researchers, we worked with research assistants. We also worked with the Abuja Urban Mass Transport Company, Ministry of Transportation, at some point Ministry of Women Affairs, to be able to tease out some of the challenges and the skills gaps related to women's employment within the transport sector, and also women as users. The peer researchers had their own rules and responsibilities. The academics also had theirs, and also INGO, that's the trans-aid sector, had their own role to play. The INGO, that's trans-aid, helped us to pilot some of the interventions we had in the country, and also they participated actively in the consultative. Let me remind you also that the country consultative groups consisted of all the peer researchers, all of us in the team, including the Ministry of Transport, Women Affairs, and all stakeholders involved in transport related businesses in Nigeria. The peer researchers were our entry point into the various communities. We were able to recruit leaders, and they assisted in identifying those we would talk to. They continue to maintain linkages between the research team and the communities we had. So they facilitated access for us, which made it a bit very easy. And at some point also, when we needed feedback from the community, they also played a very important role. As academics, I and Dr. Fatima, who Gina has apologized, was not able to join us, we provided training and technical support to the peer researchers, and also including certification of participation. We followed up a lot of field work interviews and also study in the neighborhoods to ensure that whatsoever we're doing, the communities and those stakeholders that are participating were fully carried along. We recruited the country consultative group members, and because of that, the Ministry of Transport continued to engage us in everything they do. As a matter of fact, at some point, they contracted me to work with a team on the road transport transformation plan to help them identify some of the challenges and also engender gender in the transport policy in the country. Reflections on the partnership generally, University of Durham University overall mentored us and everybody in this process. And for me, I worked directly under Dr. Fatima, who provided the mentorship for me as a mid-level career researcher. And then I also provided leadership for the research assistants, and the research assistants provided leadership and mentorship for the peer researchers. That's how this partnership worked for us. Reflecting on generally the engagement we had with the transport sector, the peer researchers and the community, were able to ensure that the policymakers, particularly Ministry of Transport, Abuja Urban Mass Transport, NURTW, etc., they now are struggling and trying, and we could see genuine commitment to integrate gender in the transport policy. I can tell you, because I was part of the team, we've submitted a draft of the gender in the transport sector policy. We've also developed a roadmap for the transport sector to engender transport. We are also advocating based on the training given by trans-aid establishment of a complaint and report mechanism, and I can tell you that the Abuja Urban Mass Transit, including the RTW, said they are going to ensure that that happens. And so we're working very keenly to monitor to ensure that that happens. Presently, we've done also advocacy visits to these institutions, particularly the policymakers, to ensure that some of the things that were came out from the researches don't just remain in the pages of our papers, but that they are actually policy issues that can be carried forward and implemented to improve the engagement of women and youths, the transport sector. The peer researchers moving forward continue to engage with the communities where we worked with, and they are very keen to see that this kind of partnership doesn't just end there, and the mentorship process, that it is being carried beyond this kind of research. Recently, I was in touch with a few of the peer researchers who said, surprisingly, that the community women keep seeing them and asking them questions about the challenges in transport, etc. So I can see that the communities and the peer researchers are also keen to see what Abuja Urban Mass Transport does with the kind of findings we came up with, and also as they continue to pursue the report mechanisms that have been put forward by TransAid to ensure that the transport sector is engendered in Nigeria. Thank you. I think I'll stop here.
Thanks very much, Plagsat. Yeah, so again, sort of showing the diversity of partnerships that you can get in work of this type. So if we move then directly to Shadi and maybe Sam as well from TransAid, who are going to talk about the work that they were involved with, in this case now moving to South Africa.
Thank you, Gina. Hi, everyone. I'm not going to share my screen. I'm just going to briefly talk to you for a couple of minutes. My name is Shadi Ambrosini. I'm a project officer at TransAid. And as Gina said, I was involved in the delivery of the practical interventions in South Africa as part of the GCRF funded project. In my pre-recorded presentation, I gave a brief overview of the project's activities, which focused on improving women's access to safe transport in the Cape Town city region, as well as addressing some of the challenges faced by women employed in the transport sector. So these activities resulted from a 3-year collaboration between young women, academics, and NGO staff, and in particular with the Women's Desk at the South African National Taxi Council and with South African NGO Sonke Gender Justice. So through these partnerships, we were able to engage with the wide range, with a wide group of stakeholders, transport stakeholders in particular, including women commuting in and around the Cape Town's city periphery, women employed or with aspirations of being employed in the transport sector, as well as male drivers and operators working in the minibus taxi industry, and taxi associations, leadership, and a range of provincial and national executives within the Santaco structure. So the aim of these activities has been to support young women to play a more active role in influencing transport transport services in their city, both as users and workers in the minibus taxi industry. And we found that these pilot interventions presented scalable solutions, demonstrating the effectiveness of collaboration between stakeholders of multiple sectors. So just leading into the question that we came up for this particular paper, we found that through research and the practical interventions, the challenges faced by women in the transport sector are varied, though there is a common thread that lies in the role that men have to play, both in the perpetuation of these challenges, but also in ways in which these challenges can be addressed. And so with these pilot activities, we deliberately focused on primarily engaging directly with women, though we also made a conscious effort to engage with men in order to create awareness of how violence and discrimination affects women in the industry and in the community as a whole. The strategies that we employed in generating engagement and support from the men within the industry included focusing on communicating the benefits of reducing violence and how negative behavior affects all women in the transport space. This approach also included encouraging peer-to-peer communication through multiple channels. So we started in the workplace and encouraged people to take these conversations at home as a mechanism to encourage men to create safer environments and to try to tackle gender stereotypes. We found that this work has the potential over time to apply positive changes in the experiences of commuters traveling in and around Cape Town, though questions remain on how we can capitalize on male involvement in other layers of the transport sector to promote women's career progression and meaningful involvement in decision-making processes. So an unanswered question coming out of this work is, how do we maximize the potential of men's inclusion in the partnership we've been building with women in the transport sector and beyond? And again, this with a particular focus on further improving the employment opportunities and career progression of women in the industry. So yeah, I guess this is kind of food for thought for discussion, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Right. Thanks very much, Shadi. So we've now had 4 presentations, all looking at partnership, but partnership and the complexities of partnership in different contexts. And if the audience now have got questions, comments, then it would be great to have those coming forward. So if you want to raise a hand is probably the best way. Shadi is going to have a look at the chat if people want to put questions in the chat, but preferably if you would just raise a hand if you've got anything.
So I see, Gina, there's a question for me actually.
Right.
So I'm just going to read it out. So it's from, apologies if I'm butchering your name, Nguyen Tron Chin. And the question is around South Africa. And so they say that in 2010, the 19th FIFA World Cup took place in South Africa. The country invested a lot in transportation. Now, are South African people in general and women in particular really benefiting from the investment? That's a really interesting question. And I have to say, I don't have the best answer in terms of like investment in the transport sector as a whole. We mainly focused on the minibus taxi industry, which is by far the most used form of public transport, connecting both inner city travel, but also sort of peri-urban, rural, both short and medium and long distance trips. And what we have found in our experience working in South Africa is that actually it is one of the public transport modes that is less invested in. And there is also quite a reluctance from governments to actually engage with this particular industry because it is characterized by huge rates of violence, anarchic tendencies, and also something that we realized, particularly relating to the issue of women within the sector, there is sort of a lack of sort of appropriate licensing and permits. So a lot of people will operate illegally. There is a lot of tension between associations that operate in similar routes, associated ganging, gun-related violence, etc. And so from what we have seen and from what we've experienced and from the experiences of the people that we've engaged with, these investments have not necessarily reached the minibus taxi industry, which something that we learn and we've been told by the various stakeholders still by far remains one of the least invested modes of public transport in, compared, they always compare it to sort of, the bus system, which is way more subsidized by governments as well, at provincial level, a national level. The trains are quite an interesting one as well. At the time that we were working in Cape Town, the trains were a complete standstill, which is why there was a huge surge in demand for minibus taxis as well, because it was one of the only ways that people could actually get around, get to work, etc. So yeah, it is quite an interesting situation, but just long answer short, these investments, I don't think that the minibus taxi industry has necessarily seen these investments.
Right. Thanks, Shadi. That's interesting. We've got a question. Is it from Howard? Have you got that?
Yes, and I think Nita had her hand up before, so should we just go with Nita first and then I'll read?
Yes, please, thanks. But it's kind of linked to the other question which I just saw in the chat. So this is for Emma, but thank you for the presentations. First, I would just say that I hope there are studies on transport and women's safe travel in India also, because I faced it during my PhD. And, you know, having lived in India, you're always looking over your shoulders. So well, my question was to Emma, because I am fascinated by the term you used, imperial scholarship, and again, decolonizing research methods, and how you actually do it. And you've given some examples how you think you have managed to decolonize your research methods or your methodologies. Did you face difficulties in deciding that what imperials, you know, from the gatekeepers of imperial scholarship, for example, in this research? And the second question is there any, is there literature on what you have done before, or have other people written how they have gone on doing, how to, you know, in their own research projects, how they think they have decolonized by challenging accepted norms? For example, you know, when we were writing this paper, this whole idea that domestic workers, you know, are very vulnerable, which is true, but they also have agency. You see, and the focus has not been on the agency, on the fact that they themselves feel empowered. So that is what we have tried to show in our paper. But there is a massive challenge out there saying, oh, how can you say that? They don't have so many of these social security aspects, which women in the Northern Hemisphere probably have. But anyway, my question was, how do you challenge imperial scholarship? Is there any literature on that? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to try and answer that and the question from Joe Howard as well. So I have to be honest and say, when we started the project, this wasn't in my head. It's something that has been developing in my head along with the whole decolonizing the curricular agenda that's been going on in the UK in the last couple of years. And I've become more aware of how I have to adjust my research practices. It's sort of been going along simultaneously with this project. So on the one hand, I was really excited by the peer researcher method, which I think is brilliant. And I have to say that Gina innovated this. And I think Gina has, I'm going to make her blush here, but I think that she has an exceptionally empowering approach towards the people that she works with, which really fed through in the kind of opportunities and approach she takes to the peer researchers, that they're, you know, it's a full team. We work as a team and everybody has an appreciated place in it. And the idea is to maximize the opportunities for everybody in it. But at the same time, I was my main area of work is the Middle East and North Africa. And this is very, it's a very hot topic on research in the Middle East and North Africa, because after 2011 and the Arab Spring, Egyptian academics in particular got really upset with Western scholars coming in with research agendas that were devised by Western research councils, going in and engaging with Arab researchers as both subjects and informants, but then taking the knowledge that was created and sort of layering on our own frameworks and then taking all the publication credits. So I've been engaging with that through other parts of my work at the same time as doing this, and trying to reconcile or to work out, well, here we have a partnership with young women in Tunisia. They're the ones I'm working with, who are very obviously in a different power position than I am myself. You know, I'm the one who's coming in here with the money. That's the big one. I come in here with the access, the networks. I'm the one that's going to be sort of leading the publication process that comes out of this. I have job security, whereas these are unemployed women who are very dependent on this project for income and for certificates. In so many ways, there's a big power differential at every stage of the project. So as I've been sort of ironically coming towards the end of it and writing it up, I've been very conscious to think through, well, what did we do to recognize and address those power differentials? What more might we have done? And how does that speak back to the larger processes of research? So to give you one example, when TransAid ran the training interventions in South Africa, I was very lucky to be able to go and observe a couple of them. And I was very struck by, at one point, we were in a room full of fabulous, empowered South African women, but all the trainers and all the research team coming from outside are all white. And that's not because that's a reflection of the circumstances of where the money comes from, where the agenda came from in the first place. In fact, I think Transaid had fabulously brought in one trainer who had come from, Sam, you might be able to correct me, whether he had come from Ghana, was it? Who was massively appreciated by
From Uganda.
Uganda, by the female participants. But I remember thinking at the time that, you know, for all this was an incredibly worthwhile project in itself, and I think everybody engaged on it was wonderful. The agenda in the first place had been set by a UK funding body, and we were effectively an opportunity for rent extraction as well. And I don't say that in a negative sense, because, you know, that is the way things are. But there are dynamics behind all of this that I think it's incumbent on us as researchers to recognize, and then to try and adjust our own practices to try and ameliorate those power imbalances behind all of this. Is that answering the question?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, the methodology. Yes, sure. Thanks for the detail.
But I'm still working it through. And I have to say, it's incredibly controversial. I gave a paper in Germany recently on precisely this issue. And a number of senior colleagues were absolutely horrified that I should even be discussing this, because it involves questioning whether Max Weber, is actually an appropriate, some of his arguments are actually appropriate to be using in other contexts, and they were absolutely horrified that how dare I even challenge some of this stuff. So it's not a done and dusted, you know, issue at all.
Plangsat would like to come in, I think, at this point.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Gina. Just to add to what Emma has said, and then also respond to Nita's question. I think the approach actually Gina uses, and the approach this research uses, a type that empowers. And I think if you look at the aftermath, the results of the research, I told you that we are doing a continuous engagement with both communities and also policy makers, ensuring that all those we've worked with had something to take home with. Of course, Transaid provided the customer service charter, which the women and communities, including the policymakers, are very keen on using to ensure that, okay, yeah, these people are part of the outcomes of these researches, and there's something for them to take up. It will interest you to know also that our work with the Abuja Urban Mass Transport involved the training of those young women employed in the Abuja Urban Mass Transit as ticket vendors. These ladies were working under very inhumane working conditions, but our research brought in some humanity into the entire work system. And when we went on advocacy visits to the director of the Abuja Urban Mass Transit, he was like, now we're able to see something different about how we approach and work with these employees of ours. So they're beginning to pay attention to certain needs and concerns of women within the work environment. And to me, I think that's the way we can empower even those we work with in the kind of research we do. Thanks. Thank you.
Sorry, I think we're very close to ending, but I wondered if Sam might want to come in and say something, because he's been very involved from the NGO side in supporting a lot of our work, and their partnership has been critical for us as academics. And I think this is a very interesting area of how we learn, I think, from one another. But I don't know, Sam.
Yeah, just very briefly, from our point of view, from Transaid's point of view, we've learned a huge amount from working with Gina, with Emma, and the rest of the team. And it's been I mean, just the opportunity to actually apply some of the recommendations directly from the research as part of the same program has been a really beneficial experience in more than one way. And of course, you know, we've designed these sort of interventions to be scalable and see a huge amount of potential in sort of scaling them and looking for additional resources to do just that in the future. I don't have much more to add to that, but of course, if there are any further questions about the implementation itself directly, please do not hesitate to get in touch with either my colleague Shadi or myself, and I'll put my my contacts in the chat function. But thank you.
Yeah, I think we probably have to close now. But I should say thank you very much indeed to everybody. And it would be good if we could sort of build on this conversation. I'm not quite sure how, but maybe we need to think about it. Because it raised so many questions, I think, looking at your work with domestic workers. And I mean, I wanted to ask you about travel to work and so on, and live in versus live out workers. So there are many interesting things, and how you work really partnering with women on the ground. But I think, I'm afraid, I think we're out of time. But thank you very much to everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Ah,